So welcome to the SDE weekend, our second group of sessions. You are in the session with the amazing Adam Ewing, and I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, around funding, innovation, and non-traditional education spaces. I am actually going to just jump right in and pass the mic to Adam so that he can introduce himself and we can get started.
Okay, so first I want to start with this is going to be very informal. I'm not going to show presentations. I'm going to try to keep your attention as much as possible. As my dad would say, I'm going to take you through a story of where I am, who VELA is, how we connected, and why I'm passionate about the work that I'm doing. But you can't get that unless you know a little bit about me and how I got here. And I'm going to pause after every section just to ask questions. But I know it's very important to get to the funding piece and why VELA does what they do. And so I'm going to start with me. My name is Adam Ewing. I work with VELA Education Fund, a nonprofit that we seek to accelerate the work of non-traditional education. We really believe in innovation for every learner. We believe that every learner is different. They can be engaged differently. So how do we empower the people that are engaging these learners? And that's really the spirit of this journey that we embarked on. So we do this by making grants fundamentally. We understand that these everyday entrepreneurs that are launching these innovative models and these non-traditional models, the funding piece is just a part of it. We want to elevate their stories. We want to create community. We want to create awareness. And so part of my job is I'm responsible for fostering strategic advancement within our organization, within the VELA community, within the non-traditional learning space. So just bear with me. I joined VELA in October, so I'm fairly new here, but I've had a background. And the reason that I joined VELA in October is really because of my introduction and my growing up in the non-traditional learning space, which I'll get into a little bit, but just their commitment to mission, their desire to reach every learner through non-traditional education and out of school systems. So I'm going to pause there and just, there's nothing from anyone. I'm going to jump right into kind of my background and how I got here. Okay. So as I said, this is particularly important to me, VELA, because of my story and my background. It's going to get a little bit personal. So I grew up with a single mom, and I did not have a community, meaning I didn't have an aunt, I didn't have a grandparent, I didn't know I didn't know my immediate family members. And the reason that this was important is because we kind of trekked through South Florida in my formative years, figuring things out. And what that translates to from an education perspective is I went to 11 different elementary schools and a variety of different types of elementary schools, from private schools attached to a church to just the local public school systems and what was available to me. Now, this really hindered my ability to learn the traditional way. Because if you can imagine this experience of a single mom, 3 kids, we're all back to back in age, no family members, so no support at all. We had to figure things out, and we kind of had to figure things out together. And so sometimes we went to 3 different elementary schools in a year. And I remember this experience. I didn't feel that I was at a deficit because of it. It was kind of exciting, getting to know different communities and different places and where are we going to be next. But from an educator's perspective, I can imagine that it was a nightmare. You get this kid who has a transcript that's probably duct taped together, and you don't know where he left off, and you don't know what to do with them. I personally, thinking back on it now, I learned mainly from the experiences here. I learned from the new communities that I moved into. I learned how people were accepting me or rejecting me in these new communities and in these new schools. I learned how overwhelming it was for a teacher when I didn't understand, there was this tension when I would show up in the middle of the school year, and this was my third time transferring, and they're like, okay, where do we start? And so the easy answer was, we're just going to lump you in with the rest of the kids, and we're going to hope that this works. And we're going to hope that you get something. And by the way, I don't know if you're going to be here by the end of the school year. So let's just see what happens. I think the message that I want to relay through this is through these experiences, my education took place really outside of the classroom. I had to take advantage of every experience. I had to take advantage of every person, all of the resources around me. I developed this grit and tenacity of, okay, well, there's no continuity in my year-to-year education, but there is kind of this awkward continuity in the people that I end up finding myself around. And so, because of the circumstances, I just went to work. My community was my classroom. I had to be resourceful. I had to learn how to cook if I was going to eat and feed my siblings. So I learned that at a young age. I had to learn how to change a tire if I was going to help my mom, because even though I was fairly young, I took on the man of the house or the person of the house. I had to step up, and we all had to step up in different ways, which means we had to accelerate our learning in some key areas. Um, so as I developed my community and I developed these learnings, I really learned how to absorb information in unconventional ways. A lot of it came from the people that we came encountered with. And one of the stories that was pretty cool was my mom. So we didn't have a car, way below the poverty line. And this meant that we had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning or sometimes earlier, take multiple buses to get to where we were going, which was school. So my mom had to drop us off at school. Usually we got to school before it opened up, regardless of the school that we went to at that time, which means that a janitor, we were either there waiting there for the janitor to come open the school up, and then we would start our day going to before school care. But before we went to before school care, we usually had to spend time with the janitor because the before school care people weren't there yet. I remember Ruby, one of the janitors who used to open up the school. She used to sit us down. She always welcomed us with a warm treat, and she didn't have a lot, but she tried to bring something from home that she felt we would appreciate, because quite frankly, she knew we were hungry. And she would tell us stories about her life growing up as a sharecropper. I learned some key lessons in Black history firsthand from Ruby's story that are still with me today, that I still tell my kids today, that really allowed me to absorb and sit in it and understand it. And I come from a biracial marriage. So understanding that side of my history, because remember, I grew up with not knowing that side of my family. And Ruby really shed light on that. Another story of how this experience kind of fostered my learning was in that same school. It was pretty hard to make friends because we moved around too much to really connect with people. And being the poor kids in the school wasn't always the popular thing either. So we all had to kind of find our things. I remember this one after school counselor, Eric, he took an interest in me, and he said, look, there's something special about you that you probably can't see in yourself. And he introduced me to football. And he started kind of breaking down the fundamentals of football. And it was something that I just immediately fell in love with and gravitated towards. And he saw something enough in me after not knowing me very long to say, hey, we want you to be the captain of this team. And it caused a big fuss because at that time in the school, there were other people that wanted to be captain, but he thought this was a rite of passage for me. He thought he was really doing something for me. And it did. It sparked an interest in football. To this day, I remember because the Super Bowl that was being played was the 49ers versus the Cincinnati Bengals. And growing up in South Florida, I became a 49ers fan because of this day. And it just sparked this interest in football. and this insatiable desire to learn the X's and O's and what people are doing here. And regardless of where I moved, I found this home, this warm home of football. I was the kid who I always found a football. I knocked on everybody's door, regardless of where we went. Hey, you want to play football? And it was my place to fit in. It was my place to make friends. It was something I could own. And I got that from Eric. I got that from one of my after school counselors. Another quick story was when we hit about third to fourth grade, I had to it was a weird situation where my mom couldn't afford summer camp and school was out. And summer school was unavailable to me, and I didn't even know what was going on. But at this time, school was where I got the majority of my lunches and food, really, breakfast and lunch. And so I remember there was no food in our house. So I walked to school. I don't know what prompted me to do that. And I saw school was going on. And so I walked to the lunchroom, and I luckily had built a pretty good relationship with the lunch workers the year before. They said, "Oh, hey, Adam, how you doing? What are you doing here?" "Oh, well, the truth is I was hungry." And they said, "Oh, here, let me make you a meal." And they said, "Look, if you want to volunteer here over the summer, we could use your help. You come here in the morning, help us out, help us prepare breakfast and lunch." That's where I learned how to cook, which my family, it kind of became my role in the house, is that, we were latchkey kids. We had to watch each other. They taught me how to cook in that summer. They also taught me a lot about preparing meals for and planning and just giving me the space to not shame me for what I was doing, because it is kind of embarrassing thinking back on it now, but just giving me the space to learn. Now, all of this is important just to tie together of the importance of non-traditional learning in my life. And I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, in the fact that education is passion driven, but education happens all around us in non-traditional ways. I'm a prime example of that. And it's what drove me to VELA. I'll fast forward the story. I've gone on to I was able to patch my education together in many different ways, which led to me eventually going to high school. We were approved for a Habitat for Humanity house after Hurricane Andrew, which stabilized our lives, and the fact that now we had one school to go to. So it's weird because I almost started this, what felt like a dropping out process, but the stabilizing of my life and giving me one place to go allowed me to throw myself into school and understand it a little better and how to put it to work for me. So fast forward, I ended up playing football in high school and getting a scholarship. And then I went to go do my undergrad in a small business school in Rhode Island, Bryant University. All they offered was business, so I ended up getting a business degree. And then went and got my master's in business administration. But I wanted to stay connected to education just because of how transformative it was. Transformative it was in my life, my siblings' lives. Really changed the trajectory. I could get really deep into this story, but I'll pause there. But that's what brought me into the education world. I spent the last 15 years working for a number of education technology organizations, mainly organizations that build online assets, capabilities, and delivery models. And they take these things and these are the assets and capabilities that non-traditional models end up using and adopting to serve their students and try to give them capacity back. So it was cool for me to grow up in that space as well, especially with my background and experience the introduction and the disruption of online education in the K through 12 space. There was this fire that was lit in the beginning when online education first dropped and the first online public school was announced. And then they had all these little online private schools, and a lot of problems came with this. And I got to witness them taking something that was so unconventional at the time, but still putting the clamps on it and saying, we have to control it. We have to make this more like the traditional model that we deliver on a day-to-day basis. We're now in this online era where virtual is being delivered, but we have to make it look like more like what we know. And so in a sense, they took what could have been what is an incredible untraditional tool, non-traditional tool, and made it traditional. And so as I was developing my career here and really enjoying it, I kind of lost touch with my why. Like, Adam, why are you doing this? Think about you, think about who you are, think about the story you just heard. How are you serving the young Adams that are out there? How are you serving those models that are trying to reach the young Adams, your sister, your brother out there? And that brought me to VELA. I'll pause there just to see if there's any questions, any remarks, anything that anybody wants to say to what you just heard about how I got here. Okay. So VELA.
I'll say something really quick.
Yes.
I'll say something really quick, Adam. Just, it was really refreshing to hear you share your journey like that, because it pulled on so many of my own experience. And I love the context that you put it in, because it's so true. I learned so much. So thank you for those nuggets and reminders. I knew that already, but just hearing you share it that way and pointing out, you know, the different assets of and different contributions and where they came in at really helps give me a better idea how to share my story as well, because it's so true. I'm like you, I had so many schools, and I was always that person that had to do the job of making friends, because we were always moving.
That's right.
And so very good context, and thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Lou.
I just wanted to say, I also appreciated you sharing your story. I especially enjoyed the question, like, how are you serving people like Adam, right? And I often feel that way. How am I working to provide, especially because I was also in similar situations as you, but now that I'm in alternative education, I don't feel like I have access to those kids that were like me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really painful, because I was hoping to have this opportunity as an adult to be that safe space for other children, but I don't have access to kids that are in need like that, because they're in the public school system. So I just try to find ways to find scholarships and find ways to get people from other places. But I really feel that need to provide something for kids that are often have that kind of resiliency. Like, when you're in those positions, you have to access everything that's available to you. And that led me to every after school program, every club I could join, right?
That's right.
But then I still felt pretty invisible in the conventional system at the same time. So how we can find those kids and give them other options. I love that. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just jump in real quick to add to what Brooklyn says? And so one of the things that I do, I felt the same thing, right? And so I do math tutoring because math makes me happy, but also because it's those kids who are still in those situations. And while I know I can't pull them out to be no, come to the other side, I can still be that safe space, right? And say this is your chance where you can be yourself. The first 10 minutes of our sessions is just us checking in, right? And us talking. The parents are are you doing math? I'm we're doing something more important, actually. But for me, that's still my way to be able to let them know, you deserve this. You might not get it at your school. You might not have this space at your school, but I want you to know, this is something that you deserve. So that's one of my little ways to just check in with my little Adams to still be able to connect with them and let them know there's more than what you're getting in the spaces where you are for most of your day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Damari. And that's why I do this. And that's why I made this big move in my life, which has been so fulfilling in a short period of time. It just resonates with me for all the reasons that you guys just summed up and that I said. So VELA, what they've done is they really had a passion for non-traditional education, understanding what Damari just said, where there are all these educators, all these innovators, all of these entrepreneurs, parents, and community members that are wrapping their arms around the students of their community, or wrapping their arms around a problem and trying to solve it and saying, you know, maybe I can make a difference here. Maybe I can bring in, maybe it won't be 100 kids, but maybe it could be 20. But the impact that I make in the lives of those 20 kids, that's enough for me. And so what VELA said was, okay, we're curious about this. The pandemic has caused this explosion where now the world is curious about this. But this has been going on for years. Homeschoolers are, I like to call them the OGs of this space. They've been doing this for a long time. And from the pandemic, there were already homeschool co-ops, and there were already homeschool parents doing these things. Well, now these numbers are starting to double, and everybody's asking questions about it. And what is this? And what are they doing? And we're all trying, as parents, trying to solve those same problems. This pandemic hit. I don't know what to do. I need to find some creative approach because my kid is being lost in whatever's being offered. Now, as you could hear from my story, there are a lot of circumstances where I was being lost, and I had to find a home with these other programs and these outside the classroom, outside the system learnings, whether it was at my youth group or my rec center or just somebody from my church or the local lawn man teaching me a thing or two. And that's where the learning took place. So what VELA quickly became curious about, it turned into a passion. And they started off, we became a nonprofit, and we decided to join the charge of increasing access to as many innovative approaches and models as possible. But what was important was we did not want to dictate what these things look like. We wanted to, and we didn't want to even inform what they look like. The passion comes from what Damari said. The passion comes from somebody who sees something in a kid or a couple kids or a group of kids, or sees a problem and says, I want to solve it. We wanted to allow them to be them and not have to ask for permission from us or not have to change what they're doing. So when we started to look at the space and we saw that so much of this is going on and so much of it is exciting, how do we help? What's the biggest need? And quickly we came to the conclusion that one of the biggest needs was funding. And though we weren't naive to believe, okay, we can solve this funding issue, we did take the task and the charge of saying we can be a part of the solution. And I think that's where we started. So we first needed to understand non-traditional learning. And I just want to point out that we started in 2020. So we're infants in this. You guys probably have forgotten more than we know. But we don't see this as we want to be experts because it's such a fluid, moving situation. We want to be a resource. We want to be a support. So I'm going to get into the specifics and how we issue our grants and what we've done and where we've gone so far. But I think it's important to understand the spirit of what we want to do is like, we're not trying to change models. We love anybody who has the heart to educate in a traditional and non-traditional way and solve these problems. We're just focusing on our lane, which is growing, validating, supporting, hugging the people that are in the trenches, building these non-traditional models. So we want to simply broaden and accelerate its impact by removing some of the barriers stifling the adoption of non-traditional learning in as many places as possible, whether homeschooling, microschooling. You're seeing all these things that are popping up with the pandemic: pod learning, wilderness programs, emergent programs, project-based learning, experiential learning, apprenticeships, social emotional learning. People are trying to figure out, how do we do this? Well, people have been doing this for a long time. And what our role in this is to be the resource to it. And So what we started with was when our original founding group came together and they're sitting around a table and they've made this decision to get into the non-traditional learning space, which was accelerated through the pandemic. And we quickly fell on the first thing that we can do is funding, was we created something called a micro grant. So these micro grants are about $25,000 anywhere or below. So they're not going to make any earth-shattering moves, but to our model operators, these are big. I think from the conversations I've had, the best way to describe them is they're more than just $25,000. It's more than just the monetary value of it. It's the validation of I'm trying something and somebody supports it and somebody gets it and somebody's going to let me do it. And that's the kind of involvement. We wanted to build this community that has just kind of taken a life on its own. And we're in this relationship of, let me learn what you do. So when we put out the grant application, it wasn't like this RFP or a traditional grant that you would apply for. It was more of, tell us what you do. Tell us how you are trying to educate. Tell us what problems you're going to, tell us your why. And that's where the journey started. And it's gotten a little bit more succinct from us, just as we've gained clarity in the space and what everybody's doing. But that's where we started. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions just to that piece.
Unmute, Lou, you can unmute. So full transparency, y'all, I am a VELA grantee, right? And I asked them to come into this space because I have been doing a lot of research to find funding to help me to be able, I don't know if you guys were on Sunjata's call earlier, but there's the idea of me being able to stay home so that my kids don't have to go to school, right? When my kids, they did a 22-month bid where they had to go to school, and that was because I had to go to work. So in order for me to really be able to live the life that I want for me and my family, I need to be able to be here. And so I've gotten other supports and other grants, but when I tell you the amount of just foolishness they make you go through for this money, it's ridiculous. So when I came across VELA and they were like, what do you want to do? Yes, do it. How did it go? And the community, I was just like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Somebody understands. And the level of trust in people to say, like, you have this idea, yeah, go for it, try it, see if it works. And if it doesn't, what did you learn from that? It's not an indictment. I never felt like, oh my gosh, if it's not perfect, then I'm gonna get in trouble. It wasn't any of that. It was like, okay, try this. Nor was it, and because I've been sharing this opportunity with other people, it never was, that's not good enough, right? Like, your idea isn't good enough. It was like, your idea is your idea. And because we're true to what we're saying about wanting to give access to more people to do non-traditional things, we love it. Absolutely. Let's do it. And this was my first time coming across an organization like that. So I know Adam's like, it's new. And I think maybe because it is so new that they aren't forcing themselves to do it the same way that everybody else is doing it, right? When everybody else is like, oh, you have to report all these billion things and collect all this data that you're not ever going to use, but we need it on our end. It's not the same. And so I just want to say, I really appreciate that. And it makes me feel, like you said, validated and supported and just respected, right? Respected as someone who is in this space doing the work, trying to make a difference in the world. So thank y'all for being different. And I saw Lou over there like, yes, that part, because we know what it feels like, right? When someone's telling you like, no, that's not good enough for our money. And we're like, but this is gonna make a difference, even if it is for these 10 kids, right? Like, no, it's not 1,000 kids, but it doesn't have to be. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks, Damari.
I was only over here, throwing my own party, like, boop, 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 boop.
So, I mean, for us at VELA, this is new. And Damari hit on a couple good points that I think we are, when I said it was fluid, It truly is, because we're every single round, every single phase, we're just learning so much from our grantees. One of the things we learned this last round, just the collection of all of our grantees. First of all, when you put us all together, we're a pretty powerful force, and I think the world is starting to see that. And secondly, that trust that Damari discussed is so valuable. We learned quickly that above all else, we have to protect that. And you don't protect that by telling someone, hey, yes, I'm going to give you money in exchange for X, Y, and Z. So we kind of follow this permissionless philanthropy model. Now we do have kind of guardrails and just making sure we're in our non-traditional lane, which is a very large lane. But what we mean is when you fill out this grant application and we go through it and we say yes, we don't need to know how you used it. I mean, we want to know what your plan is for it, but we're not going to say, hey, you said you were going to use this for blank, 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 and blank. And we need to see these outputs and how our money is being spent. We trust that these people that are passionate about doing what they're doing are going to do the right thing with this money. And I know that's a difficult concept for anybody who's in the finance world to grasp, which is one of the reasons we're a 501(c), but we're seeing a lot of traction. We're seeing a lot of people that are getting this. And we want to, a lot of people had to show up for the moment during the pandemic, and we're riding the wave of that. And now we're kind of seeing this has staying power. This isn't going anywhere. This is only accelerating. Parents who had to try something out due to the pandemic are now saying, this is the way I want to do things for now on. I wish this was available to me, and eyes are coming open. So I'm gonna, unless there's any questions or any comments I miss, I'm gonna jump into the next session.
There are a few in the chat.
Okay.
Just wondering if this is available for people outside of the United States, like Canada specifically. And if you have to be a nonprofit to apply. I think that was one of the questions.
You do not have to be a nonprofit to apply. We try to keep our parameters, and I'll get into a little bit in this next session of who are these entrepreneurs that we fund and some examples of them. But so we currently serve 50 states and 3 territories. We would love for this to be international. We haven't gotten many applications international, so it does not limit you at all. So yes, if you are international, and I think we operate in Puerto Rico as a territory and Guam as a territory, but that's as far as we've gone. Let's look at the chat here. Let me see. Sorry, I'm jumping back and forth here. Adam, can you fill in a few gaps? How are you funded? Who is the eligible? What is your capacity? Okay, so Phil, goodness, that's a to be determined, but we are funded by really anchor funders. So we have 2 big anchor funders. One is Stand Together, and one is the Walton Family Foundation, and a bunch of other little small funders who have really taken an interest in this space. We've been able to increase our funding year after year, though we've only started this in 2022. 2020 until 2022. We've been able to pay out over $12 million in grants. And we actually have just submitted the request to make sure that we have funds available to do rounds for the next 2 years, which we're looking good on. So capacity, it's an interesting question. I don't know if we put a cap on our capacity. We don't have a set amount of funds. We are geared up to do about 3 rounds of applications a year. And I'll get into the specifics of what the phases in the past look like, and we can expect them to look a little bit like that. But let me jump in a little bit if I haven't asked any questions. It's available outside of the US. Yes, you don't have to be nonprofit to apply. And then Stephen, when I get into the specifics, I'll hit on some of these points that I think you want to hear. Okay. So who we invest in? We invest in everyday entrepreneurs. We do ask that the model is up and running and that you're serving more than 2 to 3 kids currently. And the reason for this is because we kind of had a couple false starts in the beginning and really just figuring out we want to serve those that want to serve more people, that want to grow and reach and expand. And there are some homeschoolers, which are fine, that say, look, I just want to serve my 3 kids or my kid and my neighbor. So everyday entrepreneurs, these are normal people just like you, just like me. If I decided today to say, man, the options just aren't good for me here in this area, and I want to start a co-op or I want to start a little micro school, and I get it up and running, and I'm at the beginning. This is a prime example of VELA. What do you do? What is it different? How are you working outside of the traditional school system? Once we offer once the application period is open, you guys would submit an application. I would submit an application for it. We would review the process, and based on our available funds, we usually, when we do an application period, we will say at the beginning of that application, we are accepting the first 750 applications. And once we reach that, we start reviewing them until the next round. So that's typically how it works. A lot of our current grantees are parents. They are even some students, teachers, community leaders, just anyone who's delivering a non-traditional model, something that's outside of the system. I think I did a good job of explaining why we are doing this, but it's the passion. We believe that these are true entrepreneurs. We also believe that the biggest issues are solved out of need. When you see a need and you're trying to fill a need. And so giving people the space to do that without all the parameters is kind of where we want to operate. Typically micro grants, which what we give most of, are up to about $25,000. So the honesty in the applications is actually pretty cool. I mean, people say, look, I only need $5,000 because of this, 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 and this. Some will say I need the full $25,000, but we leave it. That's the trust-based philanthropy. That's us going to them and saying, hey, what do you need and what are you doing? And let's do this together. And then from there, knowing that $25,000 is not a lot, we did create what we called a bridge grant, which is up to $250,000. Now there are a lot less of these, but these are, so the micro grants are very, very early seed funding. The bridge grants, you can think of them as larger awards for more established organizations looking to bridge to a broader application. So an example of a model that they're doing good, they're growing gangbusters, and I'm saying gangbusters, I don't mean it in the traditional sense of thousands of kids. I mean, they could have grown from 20 kids to 50 kids, 50 kids to 75 kids, and then they applied for a bridge grant because they're saying, look, we can serve more kids, we can open up another location. So we'll open up the bridge grant process, which is a little bit different. There are less of those, but those are the 2 types of grants we offer right now. So just to recap a couple of those statistics of how we got here. We started in August of 2020. We've awarded more than 1,200 grants thus far. 50 states we operate in. We have grantees or non-traditional programs in all 50 states and 3 territories. Collectively, all of our grantees are serving more than 5 million learners and families. A few fun facts about our grantees. So we've awarded almost about $12 million in funding so far to date. 53% of our grantees identify as people of color. 45% identify as entrepreneurs. And this is pretty cool because you hear a teacher who just said, I'm going to try something, or a mom who said, I'm just going to try something. And Damari said it, I said it, that validation, there was a validation point where they kind of shed their imposter syndrome and said, I am an entrepreneur and I can do this. And so to hear that 45% of them started off as, hey, I'm just a mom, I'm a teacher, I'm trying something, and now see themselves as entrepreneurs growing a model, and they've really it's empowered them, that's the goal. 52% are identify as leading non-traditional learning environments. So serving their community, serving these pod, these co-ops, these multiple family models, which is really what excites us. So I'm going to pause there, see if that really answers any of the questions that might be leading out there. And then I'm going to get into some examples of some of the exciting grantees that we serve. The money comes from our traditional, we raise money. So we have to go to funders, organizations. We have a whole team of people that are just raising money to allow us to give it away. So we have really two big anchor funders, the Stand Together Foundation and the Walton Family Foundation. And we have a couple other smaller contributors, but we're always expanding that pool and using that money to serve you. We're also looking for ways to become revenue generating. And I want to be careful when I say that, right? Because I don't want you guys to think that we're in this to make money, but we want to be self-sustainable. Kind of, it stays with that permissionless philanthropy. The more that we can become self-sustaining, the more that we can just dump that money back into our grantees and make sure that we're staying with our trust-based mission. All right, let me see. When is the next round of micro? So right now, we're anticipating the next round in spring. And we usually do 3 rounds a year. The best way to do this is to Google VELA Education, sign up for our newsletter. We announce and follow us on LinkedIn and whatever social media sites that you use. And they'll announce, hey, we have a round of funding coming up, applications are coming in, and then we'll just kind of keep updating on where we're at with the application process and when it shuts off. Yes, bridge grants are, let me see, wait, didn't want to skip a question. Let's see, will there be more time for questions? Yes, there will be more times for questions and comments at the end. Are bridge grants available periodically? Yeah. So typically we'll do 1 bridge grant, and those are a little bit more strict in how we identify those. So we build a relationship with our grantees. As Damari said, once we learn who's doing what, we try to be a support mechanism. We try to shine a light on what this group is doing, using whatever media outlets, our social media presence, to really bolster our grantees and build them up and let them know that they're available. So we're also looking for creative ways to do that. Well, as we go through that process and we get to know each of our grantees and what they're doing, that fuels the bridge grant process. But yeah, it happens periodically. Usually a bridge grants are offered about once a year. If we were serving a group of kids once or twice a week and want to move towards every day, would only a few weekly meetings be sufficient for us to be considered up and running? Yes. Yeah, so our grantees range from just after school supplemental programs to some groups just provide content and curriculum. Some groups offer training for homeschool moms, first-time homeschool moms, that accelerate the work of non-traditional learning. Some groups, and I'll get into some of these examples here shortly, but some of the groups meet 2 to 3 times a week, and then as they grow and their need grows, they move to 4 days a week, 5 days a week, and whatever works for them. Who started VELA? That's a great question. So it was really 3 members. Meredith Olson is our president. She came together with Beth Selling, who was our COO. They were a bunch of educators just really sitting around a room, entrepreneurs really talking about the traditional learning space, talking about what's going on with the pandemic, talking about the solutions that are being offered there, and realized that there was a lot of great work being done, but there was no real mechanism to harness all of it. I mean, everybody was trying to create lanes of, oh, well, that's online schooling, that's virtual schooling, that's different. That's homeschooling, that's co-op, that's micro school. And we just said, well, all of it's beautiful. All of it's serving a unique needs. These are after school programs, supplemental programs, immersion programs. we want space for them all. And we don't want to tell them that there's a right way or a wrong way to do this. So how do we do that? And so Meredith and Beth went to work with Brendan as well, who's in charge of communications. And they just started ideating and brainstorming and came up with the initial concept of where to get started. Okay. And then to take it a step further, Raj, how it became is what it is, and what it will become is really informed by the grantees. The Damaris of the world saying, hey, we like this, we don't like this. I had the pleasure of working with Bernita, which was a great segue into an example of some of our grantees who I heard her say on a call of like, hey, she wasn't directing this towards us, but there was, I believe it was a council meeting, and she was like, stop pushing your agenda. And so we've made a conscious effort to not push an agenda here and protect that. So a lot of what we do and what is going to be done is going to be informed by our VELA community and our current grantees, which is important. So jumping right into examples of our grantees, Engage Detroit was started by Bernita. Bernita created a homeschool co-op for Black families in Detroit based on her daughter's experience with Detroit public schools. So Bernita saw a need like many of our entrepreneurs and decided to do something about it, not only by creating an alternative where other options were few in Detroit, but also by empowering students and parents to direct their own learning through coaching. So she has this trainer. So you come on, she'll teach you how to do it. Once you get a good idea of how to do it, then you will train another parent, and then you see it spreading. And Bernita was one of our initial grantees and has been able to secure other funds. And like I said, that validation process, that empowering process, that, hey, I can do this, somebody believes in me. And then, hey, there are other resources. And then Bernita has been just similar to Damari, just been this light that empowers now our other grantees. They come in and they talk to Bernita and, how'd you do this? And so that's really the sense of what we're trying to create. Kirby Farms. 10 years ago, Tracy, she was a former public school teacher, and her husband, I've been there. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's literally in the middle of Florida, kind of right outside of Ocala. But it's like a town of 2,700, so very small. They bought a bunch of acres of land because they wanted this old train that was just planted on it. And that turned into this incredible homeschool co-op where the train is the center. Now, the story is pretty cool because they didn't know what to do with this farm. They didn't know what they were going to do with this farm. Their intent wasn't to start a homeschool co-op, but they saw a need locally. Now, how do they tie this to the train? Well, the train ended up being an antique. And because they had all this land, people started to say, well, trains are becoming outdated. We don't really know what to do with them. So they became a train museum. And so people started sending them, they stood up their nonprofit and started sending them these trains. And the trains became the hub and the center of the homeschool co-op. And a lot of people will come to see the old trains while education is going. So she came up with this creative way to, let me use these trains, and sure, I'll take these if you want to give them to me. And I'm going to use this to fund my homeschool co-op and grow it. And so it's really cool. They've created they have one of the trains they restored and it's up and running. They give train rides, holiday festivals, and everything you can think of that they can generate revenue. But also they do classes out of these old trains. And they created an old school, what looks like a Western community. If you go to their website, it's pretty cool. And so, yeah, they're growing. They're serving more and more students. But it all came out of just, hey, I see a need and I want to fill a need. Wise Young Builders, Elijah, and I think this was to the question of, can I do 2-3 days a week? So Elijah's incredible. Elijah, he just started off by teaching his son carpentry to strengthen his math skills. His son hated math, and he talks about the math monster. And I experienced that firsthand because math is something that you need the skill before to build on the next skill and the next skill and the next skill. And if you have some holes, it gets difficult. And so what he did, he realizes when students were engaged in the building, they didn't really care about the math. When they were trying to figure out the right angle and the right degrees to put this before, division and multiplication of fractions became fairly simple. And so other people in the community started saying, hey, can you teach my son this? Can you teach my daughter this? Can you? And then it started to grow. And he said, oh, I can do this. And he's really grown in stature. I mean, duplicating his efforts, going from 2 days to 3 days to 4 days to 5 days to different locations. More and more people are looking at him, and even local communities are saying, you're also teaching him a valuable life skill and potentially an apprenticeship of, if you want to go into carpentry, this is a segue for that. Learn your math, but what if? Let me see if I'm missing any questions. Nope. Okay. Let me keep going. Colossal Academy is one that's pretty cool right here down next to me in South Florida. So she started on the farm. You're going to walk in and you go drive and you walk through this dirt road. I was met by 2 students who were my were my guides, and they walked me through the farm. So after you're passing sheep and corn and workers and all this stuff going on, you'll see this yurt in the middle of nowhere and a schooling system, a schooling table set up, an old school bus, and these kids are learning. It's a micro school, but the kids are learning about sustainability, how to grow their own food, while doing their schoolwork in between this. So their core subjects, math, science, social studies, English, but also their electives are just working in the land, and the questions and the curiosity that comes out of that when they're tending to the goats, or when it's raining that day and they need to figure out a way to protect themselves. So they're every day they're in the problem solving mechanism of, how do we operate our farm? We're growing strawberries this week. Our strawberries died. Oh, we're having a worm infestation. What do we do? One of the lessons that I had the the pleasure of participating in is they were talking about sustainability, and specifically talking about meat and the production of meat, and cows and the methane and what that does. And so they started just troubleshooting, is this a problem? How big of a problem? Every kid had an opinion. Every kid was engaged. Every kid was welcome to present a solution. And one of the solutions at the end was that was proposed, I think it was in Switzerland, was eating crickets as a source of protein. So I got to eat a couple crickets. They weren't bad. They weren't good, but that's an example of it. Surf Skate Science down here in South Florida, once again, after school supplemental program out of school. They use surfing and action sports to teach math and science. And it's anything from building your own skateboard by the end of the class and using that skateboard and talking about angles and geometry, to talking about physics on your surfboard and velocity and mass and impact and speed. And so a lot has gone into that. They've grown to multiple locations. A lot of homeschoolers will use that to supplement their homeschool co-op. So an example is Colossal Academy will actually have a day where they take their kids to surf skate science because they're close enough to do so. Green Gate Children's School. So this is an example of a bridge grant that I discussed. They're a micro school. They grew from about 10 students 2 years ago to 37 students to 60 students last year. So the kids spend about 2 to 3 hours outside. It's in Wichita, Kansas, every day, free play, ownership of learning. They have a chicken coop. I met a really cool kid, Ethan, who, I mean, these chickens were his babies, and he told me everything about them, how he takes care of them. He called himself the coop master. He said if I had any chickens, he would help me take care of them in South Florida, or I can give him a call. But he really took ownership over that piece. You'll see kids that were skating, that are rollerblading and skateboarding through the class. I think what I felt when I was there is this was their place, and they almost self-governed it as students because they realized they felt it was such a big privilege. They didn't want to take it away from them. So I witnessed on a couple of occasions where, though you're having free play, there were a couple kids that were stepping a little bit outside of the guidelines that were presented to them, and the kids corrected it. The adults didn't even have to get involved. So that was really cool to see. But those are some of the examples. And we range in anything from, as I said, just homeschool co-ops, micro schools, supplemental programs, content and curriculum providers, anybody who has a passion or is doing something to solve a problem in the form of an out-of-system program or non-traditional education. Okay, let me pause there, see if there's any questions.
Hey, Adam, I've got to
Hey.
jump off for a
Okay.
meeting. This work continues, darn it. But anyway, in two,
Yeah.
2 minutes, but I chair the board at ASDE. I would love to have a conversation with you. I'm not sure how you escaped our radar, but I'd like to get onto yours.
Okay,
And so Demaria is committed to sending me your email address, and I'll reach out to start a conversation.
perfect, will do.
Appreciate the time, appreciate the input,
you.
appreciate the remarkable perspective that you add to this conversation.
Thank you, Stephen.
Can I jump in right now, Adam?
Yeah.
This is Raj. I'm in Oakland. Part of an SDE space we're creating this year called Liberated Kids, and we actually got a grant this year from VELA, the micro grant 10K. And so, like, when I'm looking into grants, I feel like there's two main things that I'm looking at. One is like, are there any strings attached? And I think that's what was great about VELA. There weren't any strings attached. Like, do what you're doing, do it well, and all that. And the second thing I look into is like, where's the money coming from, right? Like grants and like, where's the money coming from and who's, like, what are their intentions? And so, like you shared, like looking into VELA and seeing that the money, most of the money is coming from like Walton family and the Koch brothers, which traditionally are known as these large conservative foundations that are funding, you know, whatever meets their needs and goals. And so I just had a lot of mixed feelings about that, right? Where one, on the hand, is like, yes, this is letting us do what we want to do, no strings attached. Two, are we just small pawns in some larger scheme from the Walton family of privatizing education, breaking down the public school system, which then goes to negatively affect a lot of the kids that we want to work, that we want to reach, right? The kids that are in the public school system right now because they don't have other options, their families don't have other options, getting negatively affected by all this money that's put into the privatization of schools, right? So there's just a lot of kind of, yeah, I mean, I definitely, after receiving the funding, started trying to do some digging on like, where's this money coming from, what's going on? So definitely, yeah, I think mixed feelings around that. I don't know if you have anything to say to that, or it's
I
like,
just have once again, I've been here since October, so I guess I have a couple questions for you. Is, have you felt us pushing you one way or another that might make you uncomfortable, or that you feel like this money is coming with an intent that doesn't feel good behind it?
yeah, so I think that's why I'm saying, I feel on one end, there doesn't feel like there's any strings attached, right?
Yeah.
On the second end, it's like following the money and
Yeah.
like, there's not strings attached to me specifically, but this larger scheme of funding, all these small things, like what's the intention behind that, and being a pawn in that. So
Yeah, I think what I would say to that is just spending a lot of time with leadership here prior to making this career move and moving over, is that was important to me. The intent, the sustainability of this. What are we doing? What are our funders' intent behind it? And what I've learned is right now, as we sit here today, the two groups are really curious about the non-traditional learning space. And they want to invest in it. They want to understand it. They see this movement happening. And you know that the two families that you mentioned, the two groups, they're on two very different spectrums of the side. But I think what was exciting to me is that, well, you have both of these sides taking interest in it. Now, they haven't given us any specific mandates. They've allowed us to operate and run this the way that we feel comfortable with. They haven't come to us and asked for specific data or specific outcomes or specific things. And they're really allowing us to keep with the spirit of why this was created in the first place. Now, I think your feelings are real, and I think a lot of people have those same concerns and will continue to. And I can't say that those haven't crossed my mind as well. But I can say is just from my personal answer right now and what I've experienced is it hasn't come growing up, living in the corporate world. I worked at, I shouldn't say where, but I worked for a large publicly traded for-profit education company and one of the biggest and one of the industry leaders. Well, I knew that there was always a motivation behind every move, every press release, everything we did. I'm not feeling any of that here. Now, it's early and it is something to be cognizant of. But I will say the group that I'm working with directly, including myself, we are very protective of the trust. And we also understand that without that trust, we don't have, what do we have? We've just given away money. Without having the community, without having you guys investing back into the community, trusting us that we are trusting you, then we kind of lose everything. So we won't sacrifice any of that for any amount of money. I can promise you that. Yes, Allison, we are actively looking for not only additional funders, small, large, local, but also ways that we can be less reliant on funding. And we can, if we can become self-revenue generating, then and less reliant on anchor funders, then some of that concern that Raj just laid out goes away for us. So working towards that.
I just want to say that this is the first organization that I've seen in the last like 7 years of being involved in SDE, like a national funder that has is open enough to accommodate SDE. And the only other program that I was familiar with on a national level were the ACES scholarships, and they only serve about 7 states, and they offer private scholarships to any alternative schools, including religious schools. And it could be, you know, a lot of the same funders. I looked and there's like the Waltons are also there, you know, helping over in that area. And so, but people can feel like that organization is like too hard conservative or too hard right to accept money from. At the same time, that gave my family access. And so I'm always thinking about me as, I mean, I'm selfish, but I'm thinking about me as a kid, just really wanting something different than public school and desperate for like a scholarship to make that happen for me. And whoever, like any other motivations were kind of like out of my mind. And, you know, so for good or bad, we took those scholarships. And it set us on this path. It was way worth it. I'm very happy that you're here though, in this space to offer that kind of, there's just not many organizations that have a big enough umbrella for SDE. So yeah. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And look, I'm not gonna shy away from or pretend like the source of the funding doesn't matter to a large group of people. And I can't, with 100% certainty, say that things won't change one day. All I can tell you is that right now we are dedicated to funding as many of these non-traditional spaces and these entrepreneurs as we possibly can, protecting their trust, not asking for, not requiring that they ask for permission on how to do this. And so if we keep that intent, that your trust is first, regardless of what's asked from us, from anybody, all you need to know as of right now is that we're going to guard against that. We will always be cognizant of the concerns of our community because there are concerns, there are community, but I'm going to keep going back to, without our 1,200 grantees, we lose that trust. What do we have? We just spent $12 million over the last 2 years for what? And so that's what we're building. it's pretty exciting how we get the money, and we're going to be very conscious of the money we take and parameters that come with it and protection of that trust. Any other questions? Okay, let me keep going a little bit. Here are just some of the specifics. So how are things going? Well, in the space, not just for VELA, but it's pretty exciting. I mean, VELA as a whole, we have doubled our number of employees, so we're growing. I think that kind of gets an indicator that we are investing in, there's a there, and we've been empowered by our grantees, just like our grantees have been empowered by us. So we've secured more funding to do more rounds. We don't know, I think it was Bill's point, we don't know the capacity or how long, but we're dedicated to doing the next round, which is in spring, and a following round at the end of the year in the winter. And we're going to continue to push the spirit of permissionless philanthropic endeavors. So we've also seen the growth in just the space, which is what we're passionate about, seeing the growth of non-traditional environments. There was a study that came out that there are more students involved in non-traditional learning environments than charter schools, which this excites us just to see the growth and people getting more excited about unschooling and unbundling and the different ways to educate kids and just getting creative about it and empowering these entrepreneurs. The number of homeschoolers have doubled, and that's not just homeschool one parent at home or doing school online. This includes learning environments, micro schools, co-ops, hybrid schools, because that's how they're all still calculated by the state. I can get into the specifics of, we've done really 2 waves of funding so far, 3 micro grants. Each micro grant wave is about anywhere from 400 to 450 grants that we've dispersed. Bridge grants, we've done 2 rounds. Each, we've given out 6 bridge grants so far to date. So that's pretty consistent. So you can expect more of this, kind of more of this sequencing of about anywhere from 400 to 450 grants each round given. And then about 6 bridge grants, 6 to 10 bridge grants every time that we release these bridge grants. So I'll stop there unless the next thing is just what's next for VELA, and then we can just leave it for questions. So I think I've beat the dead horse about trust-based philanthropy and what we want to do. But we also want to be more than just a funding source. And as this is informed by our community, it's been pretty amazing, the amount of support that our grantees show for each other, hundreds of Zoom calls, their feedback, their ability to share resources with each other. Well, how'd you do this? Well, I did it this way. And how'd you do this? I did it this way. Well, I'm operating in Florida and they have this. And will that limit my ability? And there's just this community of people of like-minded individuals that are starting to gel and learn how to use each other. And the growth is really phenomenal. So one thing we've created and we're launching as we speak is a community platform. So having a place where all of our community members live in an easy to way platform where all 1,200 of them can pop in, they can ask a question. And from that, we're going to build on to phase 2, which is what we're calling a resource library. We want to house all of the resources that our grantees are using. So if you can imagine, some of our grantees started off just as a mom or a teacher, but they created some pretty incredible resources, and there's an exceptional amount of learning of, how do I register as a homeschooler? How do I stay within the parameters in my state? Where do you go to get content? What kits are you using for STEM? How do you do social emotional learning? So we want to create a place where all of this is housed. So our not only can our group come together, talk about it, but they can also point to the resource library. Oh, if you look in this section, you'll see my enrollment application. You will see a legal document for a MOU that I use for a partnership. You will see a response to a proposal or an RFP that I use to get a grant from somebody else. So we're trying to create this community to see us more as just funders, but also a resource, and just bolster our community and really bring us all together.
I jump in on that too.
Yes.
Just again, from my experience. So there was times when I, was able to sit down with people from VELA, and it was like, not one-on-one, like 1-on-4, deep dive into like, what are you doing? What do you need? And from that came the opportunity for me to be on a TV show, just talking about the work that I'm doing. And that came from VELA saying, oh, we know somebody who's looking for this, you can do this. And it's always that back and forth, like even after, the program has ended, it's like, oh, someone's asking for, an unschooling mom to talk about this. Can you do this? Oh, we have this unschooling person down here. Do you want to connect with them? So that it's really intentional in terms of that community building piece. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think that goes to what we're trying to build. The amount of knowledge that Damari has amassed in just figuring it out, just scrapping, we can now kind of help the learning curve of the next person who's saying, I'm trying to go from 5 students to 10. How can you help me?
Can I just jump in on that note?
Yeah.
Well, what's just sticking with me is just the children who are benefiting from this. I mean, earlier this year, I did forest school practitioners training, or like wilderness school practitioner training. And the facilitator, who is an indigenous chief of her tribe, something she said just like fired me up. She said to us, all of you who are working with children in whether in forest school or outside of the traditional school system, you are working with the frontline workers of the future. You are the front line. Because for me, my whole motivation, my whole passion is that these children who are not in schools are the people who are going to solve some big problems in the future. We need kids with big minds, big hearts, connected. Like, they're our front line, they're our future. So that's all I'm thinking about. And so it's not that all I'm thinking about. I understand that there are perverse things at work in the world, but ultimately, if we're working for these children and we have people working for them with the funding to ultimately be raising kids with big minds, then that's a win. That's a win. So thank you very much for that work.
Oh, thank you. And I can't agree with you more on my passion. And the thing that really excites me is when I actually get to hang out with the kids. And one of the things, I got into a conversation with Tracy at Kirby Farms. I asked her, which is a difficult question. And Raj, it wasn't an intentional question, but I wanted to know, like, how do you measure? And I didn't realize that was such a triggering question for me. So I was naive. As I said, I'm learning through this as well. And she was like, Adam, we get that question all the time. How do you know that this is working? And the easy answer is people want to come to us and say, well, what assessment test, what MAPS testing, what are you doing? And a lot of the traditional measures is what they want to use. Where are they reading at grade level and things like that? And she's like, but for me, I have stories. I have these 2 kids that are Asperger's. They were severely bullied, and they didn't even like to speak to people because they were on the spectrum. And they were meek, but they gravitated towards each other. This year, both of them volunteered to sing lead in our Christmas play. And how do you measure that? How do you measure a smile? How do you measure a kid who tells their mom, hey, mom, I want to go to school today. We're working on this science project. And so, as you said, the frontline worker, these are the kids where you're moving them from, in certain circumstances, they're being pushed to the back and they don't really feel like they belong. But now you're providing the safe space to say, I belong here. I have a voice here. And the heart, the brain, you're kind of getting all of them. One of my mentors used to say, an organization can pay for your hands, but they can't pay for your brain and your heart. And if you find a place that really allows a space for all three, then you're in a good space. And I think that's what these innovators, these entrepreneurs are trying to do with all these spaces they create. These are the frontline workers. So thank you for that.
Krista asked a question in the comments. Is there a link to what the application looks like?
No, it's evolving every year. I'm going to put my email address here so you guys can email me directly any specific questions. I don't know if that's something we've ever shared out, because as I said, it's changed from round to round to round to round, and we're getting better at it. And the process is getting better at it, better, by the way. So if you send me a quick email, if that's something that we have available, I will respond with it. Yes, so we try not to duplicate micro grants. There are certain circumstances where more than one has been applied, but we usually only give one, and then we rely on the bridge grant process for anything further. Any other questions? Okay. Well, Damari, I can say thank you, or how would you like me to?
Yeah, that's fine. We thank you, Adam, for coming and for sharing. Thank you for dropping your email address. If anyone has any questions, you can ask them now. If not, we can start our break early, and then we'll meet back in 3 o'clock my time for the panel. I'm checking. Yes, so 12 o'clock Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern. Figure it out if you're not in one of those, because that's as much as I can do for our panel discussion to close out the day.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's a pleasure. I love the work you're doing. And thank you for just your care for all those little atoms out there, because God knows they need it. Thank you.